Good morning and happy Easter to everyone. So glad that you have come and chosen to join with us this morning in this house of worship. I'm reading from the book of John, the 20th chapter, the first 18 verses. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Then Peter and the other disciple set out and went toward the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent down to look in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the cloth that had been on Jesus' head not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple who reached the tomb first also went in. And he saw and believed, for as yet they did not understand the scripture, that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to their homes. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb. And she saw two angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" And she said to them that she did not know where they had laid the body of Jesus. But she turned around and she saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if they have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and their Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. This morning I would like us to focus on the tomb, on the heavy stone that sealed the tomb, and of course the resurrection. Now, the tomb represents within us all of our negativity, false beliefs, errors, so-called sin. The heavy stone represents our attitude toward God, toward the condition, the circumstance, or whatever it is that we are dealing with inside. And of course, the resurrection is when we turn our life over to God. And as we do, we release all of this negativity. We release all of any tension, anxiety, pressure, stress of any kind. And we move out into the sunshine of the resurrection experience. Now, in what I read this morning, if you stop and think about it, it sounds almost incredible, doesn't it? Here we have a man who was dead, sealed up in a tomb with a heavy stone rolled up at the entrance. And yet 3 days later, the stone was rolled away, and Jesus stepped out into his resurrection. It's almost unbelievable. Speaking of unbelievability, there's this little boy about 10 years old, and he had just come home from Sunday school. And his mother said, "Billy, what did you learn today?" And he said, "Well, we talked about Moses and the children of Israel crossing the Red Sea. She said, well, tell me about it. How does it go? She said, well, it seems like the children of Israel were held captive and they were slaves for the Egyptian rulers, the Pharaoh. But Moses came down and they went into many, many days of negotiations. And finally, the Pharaoh said, okay, I'll let the people go. So Moses led the people out of Egypt across the desert to the Red Sea. Well, they had no means to get across the Red Sea. So Moses picked up his radio phone, the little boy was saying, and he called in the sea bees. And when the engineers came, Moses said, I want you to build a pontoon bridge across the Red Sea so that we can all move over to the other side. And so they did that. And as they were almost over, Moses looked back and, my gosh, here comes the Egyptian army. The tanks were rolling in, the armed vehicles, the infantry, they were all coming to get them. So again, Moses picked up the radio phone and he called for the rockets. And the rockets came in and destroyed the bridge, and the people were saved. And his mother looked shocked. And he said, are you sure that's what the teacher told you? And he said, well, Mom, not exactly. But if I told you the way she told it, you'd never believe it. What is it like to be in a tomb of despair, a tomb of fear, a tomb of pressure, tension, anxiety, and all the rest? About 30 years ago, my first wife, the mother of my children, was diagnosed with cancer. They called it multiple myeloma, cancer of the marrow of the bone. In the town we were living in, we had an expert doctor who just treated blood diseases. They didn't know much about it in those days. So he told us the great news, that she had about 18 months to live. That's about all she could hope for. And if we got the right combinations of drugs, she might have about 6 months out of that would be halfway decent living. This was the expert. This is exactly what we believed. This was it as far as we were concerned. And that's when we entered our tomb, filled with fear, filled with impending disaster, and all the rest of it. Most of you, I'm sure, have been in that at one time or another. And so for us, there was no resurrection day. And she passed on just about 18 months to the day. She had about 6 months pretty good living, halfway decent anyway. And so we had no knowledge. We were ignorant as to how to remove ourselves from this tomb. And on the other hand, about 13 or 14 years ago, I got a letter one day from the IRS. Anybody ever heard of them before? And they told me that I owed them an amount that I couldn't possibly repay. There was no way. Back in the tomb I went. Despair. Felt terrible. Worried all the time, and so on. This went on for 2 years. And finally I got sick and tired of living in that kind of tomb. So I said to God, God, you're in charge of my life right now. I turn my life over to you. I surrender everything to you. And I'm not going to worry about this anymore. And I know that you will guide and direct me into the proper path to go. Whatever happens, even if I'm called to pay this tremendous amount, I know that God will find a way to help me. And so I surrendered everything. That was the day I walked out of the tomb into the resurrection experience. It took 8 more years before this matter was finally taken care of. And it was taken care of by them sending me a letter and said I owed absolutely nothing. But during those 8 years, I was free. I didn't have that burden of worry. I didn't have that burden of stress, anxiety, tension, pressure. I could live my life without any worry about this because I turned everything over to God, my life to God. That was a beautiful resurrection experience. It's probably the most powerful lesson I've ever had in my life because it taught me that I can trust God. I can trust God. And it seems that human beings have the biggest trouble in trusting God. Think about that for a moment. There are many times that I do not trust God, but I recognize when those times are and quickly turn it about. Because it is my attitude that in the first case kept me locked in. It was my attitude that changed, that rolled away the stone and let me walk out into the sunshine of the resurrection experience. Powerful, powerful lesson. I wouldn't want to go through it again, but it was powerful to me because now I know how to get out of the tomb whenever it appears that I might be walking back into it. Now, I think it was Patrick Henry that said this. He was complaining one day about taxation without representation. And if you were here this morning, I would say, boy, you should see taxation with representation. On one of my visits to the IRS, there was a sign over the entrance door that said, "Watch your step." But there was a sign on the exit door that said, "Watch your language." So I did. Attitude makes a tremendous difference for all of us. God has given us everything we need that dwells within us. But He also did a trick on us. He said, you've got freedom to choose. That will never be taken away. You can choose to stay in the tomb, or you can choose to get out. It's up to you and the attitude that you take. A young man was in the Second World War. He had his leg shot off, and he came home. He was talking with his minister one day, and the minister said, Bill, he said, I'm so sorry that you lost your leg. And the soldier looked up at him and smiled. He said, I didn't lose my leg. I gave it. That was his Easter message. That was his resurrection day. He changed his mind. He changed his attitude about himself, about God, and lived a wonderful life, contributing to everyone. He got out of the plum syndrome, P-L-O-M, poor little old me, right? Ever been there? You know, we have to learn to let go and let God. Just let go of all the things that seem to be troubling you. There's that beautiful little poem I know I've told you before, but I'll say it again. It's called Let Go and Let God. As children bring their broken toys in tears for us to mend, I brought my broken dreams to God because He was my friend. But then instead of leaving Him in peace to lurk alone, I hung around and tried to help with ways that were my own. At last I snatched them back and cried, how could you be so slow? My child, God said, what could I do? You never did let go. Doesn't that sound human? Yeah, you bet. But there are other people who have made the change in attitude, people that became very famous. One young man years ago had his first screen test in Hollywood. And after the screen test, the experts told him, you've got no acting ability, you're starting to bald around the head, and he said, you do dance a little, but it's not very good. What a crushing blow to some aspiring person that wants to make his mark in the movie industry. But he got out of his tomb. His name is Fred Astaire. Another young man he wanted to be a football coach. And the, quote, experts told him that, he said, you know very little about football. And he said, there's no way that you could ever motivate anybody. Another crushing blow. What happened? Did he stay in the Palm syndrome? No. He came out and was one of the greatest coaches we ever had. His name was Vince Lombardi. Another young boy in college, he loved to draw. He loved to make pictures. He loved to make people happy with it. But the art experts told him that he had no talent for that, and that if he decided to go in business in the art, he'd be a total failure. Can you imagine what a crushing blow that is for someone that wants to move ahead? He stayed in that tomb just a little while, and he came out and made his mark in the world. His name is Walt Disney. And finally, we have a gentleman from across the pond, across the seas, who in high school was called an oaf. He couldn't learn anything. And they told him he had absolutely no leadership abilities. Well, he didn't stay in the tomb very long because he made his mark in the world. His name is Winston Churchill. These are people, you know of people, perhaps you are one, who has been in a tomb. But if you are in any kind of a tomb today, I say today is Easter Day. It's Resurrection Day. It's time to move out of the tomb. It's time to roll away the stone. Because you are made in God's image and likeness. You're a spiritual being. And it's like taking a drop of water out of the ocean. The drop of water has the same elements in it as the ocean. And the same elements that are in God are also in you and me. We have the same powers within us. We can reach in and touch those powers. We can touch the love of God that will lift us up from the humdrum of this world into higher levels of living. And once you turn your life over to God, surrender to God, you will find that life is beautiful and wonderful, and it doesn't matter what happens in your experience. You know that it will only be for the highest and best for your soul's growth. And once you know that, you can sail through life beautifully and wonderfully. Isn't this a grand day to begin to have your resurrection experience? You've got the power within you. You have tremendous power, more power than you'll ever know. And we can begin to use more and more of it. You know, our reason for being here on this earth plane is to express God more fully every day. Express God more fully. Let me tell you what God is not. God is not fear. God is not anxiety. God is not stress. God is not fear. And if we are expressing that, we are not expressing God. We are not fulfilling our Christ identity.
but God is love and peace and joy and harmony and order. God is health. God is abundance. God is all of the good of life. And that's what God wants for every one of us. Every one of us. We have power we can raise ourselves up. And we can have our resurrection experience. I have written a poem especially for this talk, and it's printed in your bulletin. It's called Resurrection. This Easter morn of my life, I'm conscious of too much of strife. Because my thoughts are negative, I turn from the tomb. I want to live a life that's ever free, a life of love and peace for me. But blocking my exit is the stone, a barrier to freedom, which is of my own. At this point, the Christ does tell me how to get out of this kind of hell. He says, my son, the key you'll find. You roll the stone by using your mind. So as I dissolve my false belief, the stone rolls away, I have relief. True resurrection I do now have, ridding my error, a healing salve. And so I live in the world of love, guided by Christ in my mind above the worldly thoughts that go. My Christ, my God, I love you so. Have a wonderful, wonderful Easter. God bless you. Have a great resurrection experience. Thank you.